You're watching Beyond Market. Welcome, I'm Esther Awuni. On the show today, we'll take a look at how the youth in Africa can be better prepared for future leadership positions. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Market. You can also follow my Twitter handle too, at Esther Ugbodaga. Now, the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders started in 2014, and it's the flagship program of the Young African Leaders Initiative that empowers young people through academic coursework, leadership training, and networking. Margaret, Nongo-Okojokwu, and Ukinebo Mandela Washington Fellows for 2017 joined me to discuss leadership and how best to prepare the youth for future leadership roles. Thank you so much, ladies. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
And first of all, congratulations. I know it probably was not an easy feat. 64,000, I know, applied, and of course, here you are today from that, huge number. But let me start by asking you, what would you say attracted you to the Mandela Washington Fellow? Okay, go first.
The structure of the fellowship, I would say, because it's a combination of so many different things that give us experience and network and knowledge. So you're not just going to doing a fellowship where you go into a classroom. Of course, we had good classroom sessions. We had community service, so we were on the road picking leaves and all of those things, because it's a totally different culture. It was a cultural experience, and then we also had the cultural experience to get to understand another culture. And the best thing about the fellowship for me was meeting other Africans. It's funny that we had to go all the way to the US to get to know about, I had 19 different African countries in my school represented, and to get to know exactly, we're just here in this bubble and we just know Nigeria, we just see ourselves like, oh yeah, we're too much. But relating with other Africans, doing great things in their countries, we learned American culture, we learned about Africa. We got connected across Africa, and for me that was really special, because it was different.
Margaret?
Yeah, for me the fellowship was like an eye-opener. It was a build-up to a lot of things that you've learned about leadership. And so when we got there, we were taught leadership in practical terms. It wasn't like what you have always learned in class. We were taught how to discover the potentials inside of you, the innate things that you have that all along you've not really been exhibiting. So it was a total package. It was not just sit in tight kind of teaching. It was do it yourself. This is what leadership is all about. Put it into practice, and then you start seeing yourself from where you're coming from, and then you start saying, oh, there are some gaps, there are some things I was doing that I wasn't doing right. And then you start seeing how to cope all that.
Were you nervous? I mean, when you applied, did you think you were going to get in, Margaret? I mean, a huge number of people applied. They say 64,000 Africans.
Yes, I was nervous. I wasn't expecting to be called. I wasn't expecting it, but I just gave it my best shot. I felt like, okay, if this is what they're looking for, I think I got what it takes. But I also believe that the 64,000 people had equal opportunities as well to apply. So we're just left with trusting God and faith, and then like, okay, let's see what happens.
Fantastic. and okay, this year, 50% of the 2017 fellows are women. I mean, I'm just thinking, that is good news.
That's amazing.
How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel great. I mean, girl power all the way.
Absolutely.
I am sure that it was a conscious effort too on their side, which is something else we learned as well about inclusion. You shouldn't just wait for chance to give everybody equal opportunity. You have to be conscious, you have to be deliberate, you have to make it happen. And I can tell you that even during the fellowship, the ladies excelled. We're back now, and even in the exco of the alumni, we have like 70% female, of which Margaret is one.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about the fact that women, more and more ladies are putting themselves out there, going the extra mile and making things happen.
Okay, now this fellowship it's all about leadership, and our focus today is, leadership. What kind of leaders are we, is Africa building? What kind of African leaders are we going to have for the future? What are those values that they're imbibing right now, and the kind of mentorship that they're receiving, and that would make them be effective leaders for the future? And I'm thinking fellowships like this obviously help, and they teach you to take a different perspective, or the right perspective, as it were, in terms of what you should be as a leader. So I'm just thinking, from your perspective, Margaret, let me start with you. You said when you went there, you thought, some things you thought you knew before, were not, what they were, and you saw some gaps. So I'm thinking, does it worry you? Are you concerned about when you think about the things you saw that, there ought to be, and then the way we're practicing leadership here in Africa? What's going through your mind?
Yeah, I saw a different kind of leadership. I saw servant leadership. I saw that a lot of things what we call leadership in Africa is actually not it. And a lot more needs to be done. And from the people that went there for this Mandela Washington Fellowship, I saw a different crop of leaders arising from Africa. I saw young people who are determined to take the bull by the horn and change the narrative of leadership totally. So what when we come to Nigeria and even other African countries, we've seen sit-in-tight leadership. We've seen people who want to lead by position. But we're taught over there that leadership doesn't have to be by position. It has to be with the potential that's inside of you, the thing that you're willing to give back, the fact that you're willing to lend a helping hand and raise someone up, even from the back, leading from the back, makes you a leader. The fact that you have vision and you can see and you can point that vision to someone else and that person is willing to follow, that's leadership. The fact that you stand in front and people have that belief in you that you can take them to where they're going to, that's leadership. But here in Africa, we define leadership in a different way entirely. We feel like until I speak to you in an authoritative manner, until I lay a command, then you must follow me because I am your leader. And, all those things started putting things into perspective. And I saw all of us, young people, willing to say, you know what, I'm going back home and I'm going to change it. I'm going to do in my own corner. And we're already seeing that. Those of us that came back, we're already seeing people leading in different spheres of the economy, in different part of life. Everybody wants to put in their best foot forward and say, I want the change to start with me.
Now, Uki, it's cultural for us. We've had it for decades. Sit tight, rule, pass it down from son to daughter, from family to family, from generations. And there's this whole, and Africa, there's so many predictions that in the next 10, 15, 30 years, Africa is going to have, the largest population of youth in the world. So I'm thinking, and these youth are looking up to people right now in terms of leadership styles and leadership perspectives. So I'm thinking fellowships like this, yes, they're good, but if you look at the numbers that apply and those who actually get trained, they're small compared to the other youths out there who hold that cultural belief and perspective. So I'm thinking, does it worry you that maybe it might be a problem? Yeah, it might not be enough.
Yes. Okay, so that's one good thing about the fellowship, because we are encouraged to take everything we have learned and come back to our countries and pass that on to others. So since we've been back, 100 of us that went, since we've been back, almost every one of us has had an event. We call them yearly learns, where you get to teach the leadership styles that you learned within your own sphere of influence. But this is the thing. What I believe that in Nigeria we have people who even have these forward-thinking leadership styles. One major thing we learned was the accountability and authority. We use it backward most of the time. The boss has the authority, then everybody else is accountable. Why didn't you do what you were supposed to do? But it works the other way around. You give the people that work with you the authority, and then you are accountable for what they do with that authority. So this kind of, this thinking style exists within Nigeria, but in how many places? So by learning these things, coming back and teaching others, we're passing that knowledge and making it popular. But more importantly, we need to have events and trainings and more and more programs like this in Africa. It shouldn't always be that we're just waiting for somebody out there to come and take us. There are people here who practice this leadership style, but what is happening? How is that knowledge going down? How is it flowing in communities? How is it flowing in places of work? How is it flowing in the education system? So these are the things that really, we hold dear to hearts, that we need to get the message out there. We need to work with people who can gather youth together
so
and
basically a change of mindset.
A new generation of leaders.
Exactly. Margaret, it just sounds like a very big feat, and of course they say a journey of 1,000 miles starts, from one step. And so I'm thinking, are we on that path?
Yes, I would say yes. Fellowships like this, fellowships like Fulbrights,
yes,
and a lot of them, they put us on that path. But you see, in my own opinion, I wonder why we have to wait for the U.S. government to initiate things like this for us to move the next generation of leaders forward. So we are doing we're taking the right steps on the right path, but it's not enough. How many, imagine 64,000, 22,000 from Nigeria applied. Only 1,000 was taken. What happened to the 21,000? You understand? And these are people who, from their applications, they were able to pen down wonderful initiative that they were doing already. What happened to people like that? And what about those who didn't even hear about the fellowship and didn't bother to apply? Exactly. So we are looking at a crop of like millions and millions of youths who are out there, who are struggling, despite the frustration in the country, who are still struggling to try and keep up, who are not yet into crime, who are not yet into violence and all that. So we are thinking, my own thinking, the government needs to step in. People need to step in. When people come back from fellowship like this, how do you integrate them into our institutions? We need to put these things in place, put them into institutions, get them to start giving back. In my own opinion, let's start putting people, fellows like this, Fulbright scholars are everywhere, Mandela Fellowship fellows are everywhere. Put them into institutions, put them in their classrooms, let them start training or giving back to the society, to the students who are coming out, and let them start putting these values. What we learned, we can teach the younger ones who already, before they come out of the university, they already have a mindset that is framed already.
A good point you made there, okay, education, maybe changing the curriculum and, imbibing, I know that they're infusing entrepreneurship, perhaps, a second look at our values, what we hold dear, what we think is important, our priorities in terms of how we relate to others, how we lead. So you're thinking we should begin to galvanize or, maybe on a large scale. Because I'm thinking, Margaret talked about the government, but I'm thinking, I know there's a number of NGOs and CSOs who also drive these initiatives, but I guess that takes us back to the issue of how much, at what pace, what's the scale.
Exactly, because when you talk about in education, that is where it belongs. The truth is that in Africa, we have very good and very strong values, but those values are not institutionalized. The young people go to school and read your books. What are in your books? The intellectual things, we hope. So you have to learn the 1 + 1 = 2. What about values? What about leadership? These things most of the time are done outside the official education system. There are things that, if you happen to see a flyer that they're doing leadership training somewhere and you're that type of person, then you go out of your way to attend. But it should be meeting people where they are in the classroom, because that is where you have a captive audience. People go through school, from primary school all the way till they graduate from university. At different stages, people should be learning soft skills, they should be learning values, they should be learning integrity, they should be learning leadership. And something has to be done, and that's why I agree with Margaret 100%. How are these things being put into the system? By people, not just by fellows, but by people who actually live and imbibe these values, not just by somebody who feels, this is a good thing for me to do, let me go and do it, and probably doesn't have the skill or the ability, but has the right connections to do it.
I'm just thinking, you talked about the fact that, those who couldn't get in, who had good initiatives, but I'm thinking, in your experience, but I know obviously you haven't met all the African youth, but do you think that the average African youth has that mentality of, okay, I see what my leaders are doing, leadership is not great, but I want to do better?
Yes, I think so. I believe so.
Is that too
I'll tell you that the average African youth is amazing.
Yeah.
Most of the time, all that's missing is hope.
Exactly.
So you find this amazing young person who just feels there's no point. Because no matter what I do, everything they hear, everything they see tells them you are too small to make any difference. But you now have to have that strength of character. You find that even in that situation, you see people who nothing tells them they can make it, nothing tells them they're big enough to make a difference, but they make so much effort to make a difference. I've met people who, even among us, we have a young lady who, she's an Igbo girl, she served in Bauchi, and she just started this project to dig boreholes and provide people with water. Nobody asked her. And these are the ones you know. Every day I meet a new person doing something and I'm thinking, you're so young, what's going on? Exactly. How did you come up with this? Who gave you this kind of, mindset? So these are people that are doing these things without support. Imagine that there is the support, there's the awareness, there's the encouragement. Just imagine what people can do.
That's why I said yes to your question, because if people like her, like Chibuzo, her name is Chibuzo, one of the fellows, could go out of their way to do things like that, people who come to apply for this fellowship were not handpicked. You know, we were just there. We were doing our own stuff. We were just doing what we felt like, oh, this is what I can do in my own corner to change this narrative. And then we were just picked, you know, fortunately. So I believe that that thing is there, but given to the situations in the country right now, you can have a lot of people who are already pushed to the wall, who might be frustrated, who may want to do the wrong things. There's so many reasons to do the wrong things, but we need to also give them reasons to do the right thing.
I've been speaking to Margaret, Nongo-Okojokwu and Ukinebo Dare, Mandela Washington Fellows for 2017. As we continue our focus on preparing future African leaders, our guests are Margaret, Nongo-Okojokwu and Ukinebo Dare, Mandela Washington Fellows for 2017. Now, I know that you're expecting this fellowship, from what you said so far, to obviously change your life in so many other ways. So I'm thinking individually now. I know that you're all, you're both doing your different things. So I'm thinking, in what ways will what you've learned from through this fellowship begin to change what you're doing in your personal business life going forward? Okay, let's start with you.
Okay, so before the fellowship, I was running Poise Graduate Finishing Academy. And an organization called EcoBits. In both organizations, we train unemployed youth and we help them get jobs or start their businesses. I've been doing that for almost 8 years. And as a result of the fellowship, first thing is, there's power in knowing that you're not the only one like you. Honestly, when you feel like, oh, the whole world is just going in one direction and you think you're this, what will I say, Superman trying to save the world, it becomes overwhelming. But when you meet 100 other people doing things in 100 other places, there's strength that comes from that. There's purpose that comes from that. That's one thing the fellowship did. For me, it was a source of encouragement. And then when you talk about the exposure to a better way of doing things, so what it has done in terms of collaborations, I've been able to meet other people that I can work with to do more, to change the lives of more people. On getting back, I also was promoted to become the group MD of Poise.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I can tell you that the changes that I'm making, a lot of the changes I'm making in the organization as a whole, in all the units, come from the knowledge that I got as a result of the fellowship. We were taught by the best of the best in all the universities that we went to, and that is impacting our businesses directly. But because our businesses are businesses that impact human beings, it's also impacting more human beings directly. So, I mean, the sky is the limit.
Margaret, what next for you?
Yeah, okay. So before the fellowship, I was a reporter. I'm the editor of my magazine, Orient Energy Review, or in the oil and gas space. So I'm also a public speaker. And one of the things I focus my energy on is local content development in the oil and gas sector in Africa generally. Okay. And when I go to speak outside, I speak about local content and community engagement, stakeholders engagement in the Niger Delta region, most basically. But when I went out and came back after the fellowship, I realized that a lot more needed to be done. And it led me to start up this organization called Ricochet Network for Sustainable Development, where we're looking into food security, and then youth empowerment and girl, child, and women education. So that training is what opened my mind to say, oh, you just don't need to stay in your space anymore. There's so much that needs to be done to change the narrative, to change everything you want to change, everything you want to talk about. You can start doing it. Take a step and start doing it. Okay. And going forward, that's what my organization is going to be focused on, to bring about food security. There's a lot that needs to be done in that aspect, but trying to feed the hungry and trying to make sure that there's food on every table.
I like what you said, Uki, earlier on when you said that the African youth lacks hope. So what I'm getting from what you experienced from this fellowship so far is the fact that you now see yourself as being able to do whatever you can, whatever you can be, whatever you want to be. And I know this is something that's, preached in developed countries, but here in Africa, there's so many constraints. I mean, we haven't sorted out hunger issues, housing issues, electricity issues. These are basic things that also have been sorted decades ago, but we're still grappling with those things. So I'm just thinking, when you look down into the future, 15, 20 years from now, and the African youth that are, well, that will be the leaders of tomorrow. But my mind still goes to some of the countries that are still in conflict now. And so some of the youth who are in countries where they've had leaders who have been there for decades and, may continue in that, line. So I'm thinking, are we going to be fortunate enough to be led in the future by, the leaders, those youth who were fortunate enough to get that kind of training, to have the right perspective on leadership? Okay. I
certainly believe so. Even in those countries where there's conflict, and where you have issues, we met fellows who are still in that situation doing great work. And you see, that tells you the resilience of the African youth. I believe very strongly that as this is encouraged, as this is groomed, as this is improved upon, we will begin to see the change that we're looking for in terms of the kind of leaders, in terms of that when there is a critical mass, the pressure will have to break the glass. Yes, there's a glass ceiling, and this is not even just gender related, it's social, it's everything. But as much as the critical mass begins to build, one way or another, people are going to begin to pop up on the other side. And that will encourage more people, and that will bring about change in more African countries. That's one thing we benefited, is that now we all collaborate across Africa. We're not just looking in a small space. How can what I'm doing here make an impact in your country? How can what you're doing in your country make an impact here? How can we work together? And that will bring about a whole new Africa where people work together as one, rather than, it's easier to travel to the UK than to travel to another African country.
Absolutely.
I mean, but that change will come, I believe so.
Margaret?
Yes, so in my school, we had one of our fellow who is from Togo. Okay. And on return, he has always had that idea that he came with, that he wants to be the future president of Togo. And he is already leading some young people in his community for change, trying to to talk to the government to change whatever they are doing that was wrong. So we just felt like, oh, that's a very, very huge way of thinking, But when a very brave word. But when we came back, just 2 weeks after we came back, you saw the crisis in Togo. Yeah. That guy was one of them. He was one of the people leading that change, marching forward with whatever it is that he has learned from the US, from the school. So it made me sit down and like, oh, the change is coming and the change is here. And just like she said, when we all start and we put in our different efforts from different parts of the continent, I believe that change will come to happen very, very soon. And this my fellow colleague is not the only one. There are people who because there are different tracks. There's public management, there's business entrepreneurship, and then there's civic leadership. People were there whose all their aim is, I just want to be the leader that Africa needs. And you see them working hard towards it. And all we could do for them is just to support whatever it is they're doing.
Interesting. We have about 2 minutes left. Going back to the issue of mentorship, I know that also part of what this foundation does is to mentor. So I'm thinking, in terms of mentorship, should it just be solely the responsibility of what NGOs, foundations like this? I'm thinking on the side of government policies, should we have that kind of complementary effort?
For mentorship, I don't know if you can legislate mentorship because it's a personal thing. Absolutely. And it's about two people identifying each other and knowing that there's a potential for that. But there should be more emphasis on it. There should be more people in public office mentoring young people. If you feel like you want to hold on to this seat until the seat no longer exists, then you will not be able to mentor people to sit in there. I believe that once you take up a position, immediately you should be trying to fire yourself. Try to find people who can take that seat from you. What that does is that it pushes you to keep also getting better and going to the next level rather than getting stuck where you are. So mentorship should come from the government perspective, yes, but more from the mindset, the way the leadership is done. All right. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, ladies. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know that I'm going to hear great things about you not too long from now. Congratulations once again. And I hope and I wish you all the very best. Thank you for being on Beyond Market.